The contractions started on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning where everything feels both ordinary and electric at the same time. I was 38 weeks pregnant, folding tiny onesies in the nursery we'd spent months putting together, when the first real wave hit hard enough to make me grip the edge of the changing table. I called Marcus immediately. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called again, and again. By the fourth attempt, I was in the car, driving myself to the hospital with one hand on the wheel and the other, pressed against my stomach, breathing through pain that felt like my body was trying to turn itself inside out. He finally answered when I was already in triage, being hooked up to monitors by a nurse whose face I could barely focus on through the contractions. "Babe, I can't make it right now," he said, and I could hear traffic in the background, the muffled sound of music playing somewhere nearby. Something came up at work. "I'll be there as soon as I can, I promise." I gave birth to our daughter 7 hours later, alone. The only hand I held belonged to a labor and delivery nurse named Patricia, who stayed past the end of her shift because she said no woman should go through that without someone in her corner. Marcus showed up 3 hours after Ella was born. His shirt was wrinkled. His cologne smelled different, heavier, like someone else had chosen it for him. And when he leaned down to kiss my forehead, I saw it, a smudge of lipstick on his collar, barely visible but unmistakable in the harsh fluorescent light of the recovery room. He didn't apologize for missing the birth. He said he'd explain later. He said it was complicated. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just lay there in that hospital bed, holding my daughter against my chest, and felt something inside me go completely, permanently still. My name is Vanessa Carter. I'm 35 years old now. But this story begins when I was 32, lying in a maternity ward, staring at a man I thought I knew, and realizing I'd spent 4 years of my marriage living inside, a story someone else had written without ever asking my permission. I'm a medical billing specialist by trade, which means I spend my days finding discrepancies in insurance claims, tracking down charges that don't match procedures, and cross-referencing timestamps on patient records to make sure everything lines up exactly the way it should. I built a career on noticing what other people miss. I just never thought I'd need those skills to decode my own life. Marcus and I got married when I was 28. He was charming, ambitious, a pharmaceutical sales rep who always seemed to know exactly what to say to make a room full of doctors feel like he was their best friend. I loved watching him work a room, the way he could make anyone feel important, seen, heard. I never stopped to consider that a man who's that good at performing sincerity might be performing it everywhere, including at home. When I got pregnant, he seemed excited. We picked out names together, argued playfully about whether we'd raise our kid to root for his team or mine, stayed up late talking about the kind of parents we wanted to be. It felt real. It felt inevitable, like something the universe had always intended for us. But universes don't intend anything. People make choices, and Marcus had been making choices I didn't know about for longer than I'd been carrying his child. I found out the truth 6 days after giving birth, still recovering at home, still bleeding, still struggling to understand how a human being could grow inside you for 9 months and then leave you feeling more empty than you'd ever felt in your life. My phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photo. Marcus and a woman I'd never seen before, sitting in a restaurant I knew well because we'd celebrated our anniversary. There 8 months earlier. Her hand was on his. The timestamp on the photo was from the day I went into labor. The message beneath it read, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. He told me you two were separated. I didn't know about the baby until I saw his Facebook yesterday. I thought you deserved to know the truth." I sat on the nursery floor with Ella sleeping in the bassinet beside me, phone in my shaking hands, and I did what I do best when nothing makes sense. I started gathering evidence. I went through our phone records first, pulling up the shared account we'd always kept for practical reasons, the one Marcus probably forgot I still had full access to. 3 months of calls to the same number, most of them late at night, many of them lasting over an hour. The night I went into labor, he'd been on the phone with her for 47 minutes. I checked our credit card statements next. Charges I'd overlooked before suddenly rearranged themselves into a pattern I couldn't unsee. Florist deliveries I'd never received, hotel charges during business trips that lasted 1 day too long, restaurant bills for 2 on nights he'd told me he was eating alone. For 4 years, I had been building a life with a man who had been building a separate life alongside it, one I was never supposed to see. I didn't confront him, not immediately. I'd learned from my work that the moment you reveal you know something, you lose your advantage. People start covering their tracks, deleting evidence, coordinating stories. Instead, I called a family attorney named Lisa Chen, whose name I found through a colleague. I booked the earliest appointment available, showed up with a folder of printed records, and listened as she walked me through my options with the kind of calm professionalism that told me she'd seen versions of this story 100 times before. "Document everything," she said. "Don't let him know you're preparing anything. And whatever you do, don't leave the house with your daughter unless you're ready to file." I went home that afternoon, fed Ella, changed her diaper, and made dinner for a man I was already planning to divorce, all while he sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, texting someone he thought I didn't know about. For 2 weeks, I played the role of a wife who suspected nothing. I smiled when he kissed me goodbye. I listened when he complained about work. I even thanked him when he finally, awkwardly, apologized for missing Ella's birth, blaming a client emergency he could never quite explain in detail. And the entire time, I was building a case against him that he wouldn't see coming until it was too late to do anything but accept it. It was Lisa who told me about the custody advantage I didn't know I had. In our state, abandonment during a medical emergency, especially childbirth, could be considered in parenting evaluations. The fact that he'd missed the birth entirely while having an affair created a documented pattern of prioritizing his relationship with another woman over his responsibilities as a father. The mistress, whose name I learned was Simone, had already given me more ammunition than she probably intended by sending that first message. I'd responded carefully, kindly even, and over the course of a few days she'd told me everything. How long the affair had been going on, the promises Marcus had made her about leaving me, the trips they'd taken that he'd disguised as work conferences. She didn't know she was handing me the evidence that would cost him nearly everything in the divorce. I filed on a Tuesday morning exactly 3 weeks after Ella was born. Marcus was served with papers at his office, in front of colleagues who'd all sent us gifts when she was born, who'd all congratulated him on becoming a father. He called me 17 times that afternoon. I didn't answer a single one. When he finally came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room with Ella asleep in my arms and a suitcase already packed by the door. "Vanessa, we can fix this," he said, his voice raw in a way I'd never heard before. "I made a mistake. I was scared about becoming a father, and I handled it wrong, but I love you. I love Ella. Please don't do this." I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd once made me believe in forevers and happy endings, and I felt nothing but a distant, cold clarity. "You weren't scared, Marcus," I said quietly. "You were selfish. There's a difference." He left that night. The house, which we'd bought together, became mine in the settlement 6 months later. So did full physical custody of Ella, with Marcus granted supervised visitation every other weekend, a condition he barely fought because Simone had already left him by then, unwilling to play stepmother to a child that reminded her she'd been lied to just as much as I had. For 3 years, I didn't see Marcus outside of custody exchanges, which his mother handled because he couldn't look me in the eye. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd lost his job, that he was struggling, that he'd moved back in with his parents. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything at all. I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I got a promotion at work. I bought a better car. I enrolled Ella in a preschool where she thrived, where she made friends and painted pictures I hung on our refrigerator, where she never once asked why her daddy wasn't around because she'd never known. A version of life where he consistently was. And then, 3 years to the month after I gave birth alone, I saw him again. I was at a hospital fundraising gala, the kind of event my company sponsors every year, where I usually make an appearance, network with a few people, and leave early. I was standing near the bar, holding a glass of wine I wasn't really drinking, when I heard someone say my name. I turned and there he was. Marcus looked smaller somehow, like the years had taken something from him that he couldn't get back. His suit didn't fit quite right. His smile, the one that used to fill rooms, looked uncertain, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to use it anymore. "Vanessa," he said again, and I watched his eyes do something I'd only seen once before. The night I handed him divorce papers, they filled with a fear he couldn't quite hide. You look amazing. Thank you," I said, my voice even unbothered. "How have you been, Marcus?" He tried to make small talk, stumbling through updates about a new job he'd just started, a therapist he'd been seeing, changes he'd been making. I listened politely, the way you listen to a stranger on an elevator, and I realized something that surprised me. I had spent 3 years afraid that seeing him again would hurt, that it would bring back all the anger and betrayal I'd worked so hard to move past. But standing there, looking at the man who'd abandoned me during the most vulnerable moment of my life, I felt nothing but indifference. He was simply a person I used to know, someone who'd made choices that no longer had any power over the life I'd built without him. "I've been wanting to reach out," he said, his voice dropping lower. More urgent. "I've been thinking a lot about Ella, about being more present. I know I haven't been. I know I messed up, Vanessa, but I want to try again. I want to be her father." And there it was, the ask I'd been waiting for without knowing it. "You are her father, Marcus," I said carefully. "You see her every other weekend." "I mean really be her father," he said. "I want more time. I was hoping we could renegotiate the custody arrangement. I'm in a better place now. I'm ready." I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "You want to renegotiate custody," I repeated. "Yes," he said, and something like hope crept into his expression. "I think it would be good for Ella to have both parents equally involved. Don't you?" I thought about the night I drove myself to the hospital. I thought about the labor and delivery nurse who held my hand because my husband was with another woman. I thought about 3 years of bedtimes and fevers and first words and first steps that Marcus had missed. Not because he wasn't allowed to be there, but because he'd simply chosen not to show up. "No," I said simply. He blinked. "No?" "No, Marcus. I don't think that would be good for Ella. I think consistency is good for Ella. I think stability is good for Ella. I think having one parent who's been there every single day of her life is good for Ella." His face shifted through several emotions at once. Confusion, frustration, something that looked almost like anger. "You can't keep her from me, Vanessa. I have rights. You have exactly the rights the court gave you," I said, and my voice didn't rise, didn't waver. "The same court that heard about how you abandoned your wife during childbirth to be with your mistress. The same court that saw 3 years of missed visitations and inconsistent child support payments. If you want to renegotiate, Marcus, we can absolutely go back to court. But I don't think you're going to like how that conversation ends." I watched the realization settle over him, the understanding that the power he'd once held in our relationship, the ability to charm and convince and make me doubt my own perceptions, was gone. I wasn't the woman he'd left in that hospital bed anymore. I was someone he no longer recognized, someone he couldn't manipulate or guilt or persuade. "I'm different now," he said quietly. And for the first time, he sounded genuinely desperate. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking anyway. Please, Vanessa, she's my daughter." "Then act like it," I said. "Show up to the visitations you already have. Pay your child support on time. Be consistent. Be reliable. Be the father you're asking me to believe you've become." I set my wine glass down on the bar and picked up my purse. "And if you can do that, if you can show me over the next year that you're serious, then maybe we can talk about adding an extra afternoon here and there. But you don't get to miss 3 years of her life and then walk back in demanding equal billing, Marcus. That's not how this works." I started to walk away and he called after me one last time. "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't give me back the moment I became a mother, Marcus. Sorry doesn't give Ella back the first 3 years with a father who was too broken to show up. Sorry is just a word. And I stopped accepting words without action a long time ago." I walked out of that gala with my head high, got in my car, and drove home to relieve the babysitter who was watching Ella. I paid her, locked the door behind her, and went upstairs to my daughter's room, where she was sleeping peacefully, her tiny hand curled around the stuffed rabbit she'd carried everywhere for the past 6 months. I stood in that doorway and thought about all the versions of this story I'd imagined over the past 3 years. The version where I fell apart, the version where I begged him to come back, the version where his absence broke something in me that could never be repaired. None of those versions had come true. Instead, I'd built something better than the life I'd lost. I'd built a life that belonged entirely to me and my daughter, one that didn't require anyone's validation or presence to be whole. 3 weeks after the gala, Marcus requested a modification to the custody arrangement through his lawyer. Not for more time, but for a more structured schedule, one that held him accountable to consistent visits. Lisa Chen called me to discuss it, and I could hear the smile in her voice when she explained what it meant. "He's actually trying," she said. "I didn't expect that." "Neither did I admitted. I agreed to the modification, not because I forgave him, and not because I thought he deserved more access to Ella, but because I'd meant what I said at the gala. If he was willing to show up, to be consistent, to be the father he should have been from the beginning, then my daughter deserved the chance to know him. But it would be on my terms, on a schedule that protected her, in a framework that held him accountable. because I'd learned something in those 3 years that changed everything. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And the most powerful thing you can do after someone betrays you isn't to make them suffer. It's to build a life so full, so complete, so undeniably yours that their absence becomes irrelevant. I think about that night in the hospital often. The night I became a mother without the man who should have been standing beside me. For a long time, I thought of it as the worst night of my life. I understand now that it was the night I stopped waiting for someone else to save me and learned to save myself. Marcus kept the modified schedule for 6 months, before he started canceling visits again, before the texts with excuses started piling up, before it became clear that consistency was a goal he could reach toward, but never quite hold on to. I wasn't surprised, and more importantly, I wasn't hurt. Ella is 4 now. She knows her daddy loves her, in the limited way he's capable of showing it. And she knows without question that her mama will always, always be there. That's enough. Some days she asks why her daddy doesn't live with us. I tell her the truth in language she can understand. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that change families. And that's okay, because families come in all different shapes, and ours is exactly the right shape for us. She accepts this the way children accept most truths, when they're delivered with love and certainty. And then she goes back to playing, to building block towers and singing made-up songs, to living a childhood that isn't defined by what's missing, but by what's abundantly, beautifully present. As for me, I stopped looking backward a long time ago. I look at my daughter instead. I look at the life we've built in a house that's ours, in a routine that brings us peace, in a future that belongs to us alone. And I know with absolute certainty that the man who walked away from us in that hospital didn't leave us broken.